Picture your last day of work. Not a day you chose, a day your body chose for you. Your hands are too weak to hold the tools. Your eyes are failing. You've worked for 50 years, and now you simply can't anymore. For most Americans throughout history, that day came with no pension, no social security check, no savings large enough to matter, no government safety net of any kind. The moment you could no longer work was the moment your income vanished completely. So what happened next? Where did the old go? How did they eat, stay warm, and survive? The answer is one of the most quietly brutal chapters in American life, and it explains why the country eventually built one of the largest programs in its entire history. For most of human history, retirement as we know it simply did not exist. The idea that you would stop working at a certain age and live for years or decades on saved-up money was, for the average person, almost unimaginable. In early America, most people worked on farms, and on a farm, you worked as long as you were physically able. There was no set finish line. An aging farmer would gradually do lighter tasks, mending, watching children, tending a garden, while younger family members took over the heavy labor. Work simply tapered off until death. The concept of a fixed retirement age would have made no sense to them. You didn't retire. You worked, you slowed, and eventually you died, often still living and working on the same land your family farmed. So if there was no pension and no government check, what caught people when they could no longer work? The answer, for most of history, was simple. Family. The family was the safety net. Grown children were expected, morally and often by sheer necessity, to take in their aging parents. Multiple generations lived under one roof. The elderly earned their keep by contributing what they could: childcare, cooking, wisdom, a hand with the chores. In exchange, they were fed and housed until the end. This system worked, more or less, in a rural world where families stayed close to the land and to each other. Your children lived nearby. The farm could absorb another mouth. An extra pair of hands, however weak, still had value. But this arrangement had a dark side. If you had no children, or your children died, or they were too poor to help, you were in serious trouble. And for those people, there was another destination. A place people feared. It was called the poorhouse, the almshouse, the county home. And for the elderly with nowhere else to turn, it was the destination of last resort. The poorhouse was a grim, tax-funded institution where the destitute, the old, the sick, the disabled, the orphaned were housed together in often miserable conditions. It was not charity in any warm sense. It was designed to be unpleasant, on the theory that it should never be more comfortable than working. Families were sometimes split up, the food was poor, the buildings cold, the stigma crushing. For an elderly person who had worked hard their whole life, ending up in the poorhouse was a source of deep shame and terror. It meant you had outlived your usefulness and your family's ability to care for you. And yet, for many, it was the only option left. Growing old poor in America meant living under the constant shadow of that door. For a long time, the family and poorhouse system limped along. But then America changed in a way that shattered it. The country industrialized. People left the farms and poured into the cities to work in factories. And this transformation quietly destroyed the old safety net. On a farm, an old person could always do something useful. In a factory, you were valued only for your speed and strength. When those faded, you were simply let go, with nothing. There was no pension. You were discarded. Worse, the tight-knit family structure came apart. Children moved to distant cities for work, sometimes hundreds of miles from aging parents. The crowded apartment of an industrial worker couldn't easily absorb an elderly relative the way a farmhouse could. The economic value the old once provided was gone, and the physical closeness that held families together was gone too. America had built a modern industrial economy, but it had knocked out the supports that once held up the old. A crisis was building. And then it arrived, all at once. In 1929, the stock market collapsed and the Great Depression descended on America. It was the worst economic catastrophe in the nation's history, and for the elderly, it was devastating. Whatever meager savings older Americans had managed to set aside were wiped out as banks failed by the thousands. Grown children who might have supported their parents were themselves thrown out of work, unable to feed their own kids, let alone an aging mother or father. The private charities that helped the poor were overwhelmed and ran dry. Suddenly, old age poverty wasn't a private misfortune affecting a few unlucky families. It was everywhere, a mass emergency. Estimates suggested that a majority of elderly Americans could not support themselves. The old were among the hardest hit by the Depression, and the country could see it plainly. For the first time, Americans in huge numbers began to ask a radical question. Shouldn't there be some kind of system? Shouldn't a person who worked their whole life be guaranteed something to live on when they grew old? The pressure became impossible to ignore. The answer came in 1935. As part of the sweeping response to the Depression known as the New Deal, the government passed the Social Security Act. The idea was revolutionary for America. Workers and employers would pay a small tax during a person's working years. That money would fund monthly payments to Americans once they reached old age. For the first time, the federal government guaranteed the average citizen an income after they stopped working. Retirement, as a real funded stage of life, was, for millions of ordinary people, essentially invented. It did not happen without a fight. Critics called it un-American, an overreach, even a step towards socialism. Its early benefits were modest and left many people out. But the core principle held, that growing old should not automatically mean falling into poverty. Today, retirement feels like a natural stage of life, but it is a modern invention, forged in the desperation of the worst economic disaster the country ever faced. For most of history, there was no such thing. There was only work, family, and fear, until a single law changed the meaning of growing old forever.